Hey folks, in this video I'm going to show you how to install dbt-core, start working on projects on GitHub, and start developing your dbt skills. With this we're going to install Git, we're going to install Python, we're going to install dbt, and we're going to install a SQL client for you as an optional extra. This can be quite helpful when it comes to reading databases as well. So the first place you come is here into the documentation and find how you install dbt. In this case I found with pip. So pip is a Python installer. It installs different packages, so in this case dbt. But one of the main things we're going to need to check first is what version of Python, Git, all these other applications you've got to start with. So crucially on this page what you want to look at is what version of Python can I use? If you click this, you actually get a matrix here for what you can actually use with different versions of dbt. So now we see that we need a minimum 3.8 of Python, maximum 3.12. I say this because at the time of recording 3.13 is available and we don't have certainty of whether that version of Python will work with any version of dbt. As we can see here that probably 3.10 is a good Python version to install as it gives us Python usage across all current versions of dbt. Okay, so how do we check whether we've got Python installed, what version of Python we have? We come to the terminal. So on Windows, I will open up a terminal, comes up as Windows PowerShell. On Mac, you'll have something similar, but this is where you go and type in commands to check what version you have. So for example, I can check what version of Python I have. Okay, so I can see that I've got version 3.12 installed, so I'm going to want to go for that version 1.8 of dbt. And you can check what version of dbt you have as well by doing a similar command. I know I'm up to date, I've got version 1.8 of dbt, that's good. Now you might be in the situation where you have multiple versions of Python installed, and you can actually call different Pythons as well, so you could call version 3.10. So here I'm able to give a specific version number with the Python and ask which version I've got. And lastly, we're going to want to check if we have a version of Git installed. So again, use the command git followed by version. Now, if you're finding any of these aren't installed, don't worry, I'm going to go through those. If you are having issues with any of these, you can skip ahead to that point in the video where I'll go and install it from scratch for you. After installing these, we'll then go on to bringing this into VS Code and starting a project there. So if you have the relevant version of Python, Git, and dbt installed already, you can go ahead to the VS Code section. So if you don't have Git installed, you can just do a Google search for install Git, and you'll come to a page like this where get started for installing Git. Git is a way of documenting sort of what has changed from a document, as well as being able to move documents between a central repository and your own machine. It's very useful for things like versioning control and being able to share changes and documentation with a wide group, like a team of developers. So for me, I'm going to come down to the install for Windows, and I'm going to go to the install section here. And I'm going to go straight away, I'm going to go click to download, and that will start downloading for me. Okay, so running the installer will show me the setup page, and I'm going to click through next here. Those all look okay. Okay, so I'm just going to hit next through all those options till I get to this point where I'm actually installing Git. Okay, so that's installed. Where it says Git bash here, Git bash is like another version of terminal that you can use to run these different Git commands. I'm going to leave that unticked for now. I'm just going to go finish. And then I'm taken to this page, which is all the release notes of what's changed from the previous version. But yeah, on Windows, what you can do is look under your program files, and you should have a new folder called Git. This is where Git will install to. And this is where you will be linking to find the command for Git. So here they have certain applications for Git command line, Git bash. But what you want is in here in bin, where you have this git.exe file. I'm going to hold on to this for now. What I would recommend is checking what version of Git you have on terminal at the moment. Okay, so if you come back over to terminal, you should actually be able to call that application from your command line. So if you do take the file path and then add /.git on the end. Note here, I've actually gone and double quoted for program files because this space will mess up the command. And then done as before, where we add -- version on the end. And I can see I get the same result coming back. So I can actually call this from my command, and I can do different git commands with this. But it's nicer if it comes up like this, right? So what we need to do is go and add it to our environment variables on the path. Path just means it's going to look in this folder for something called git when we run the command git. So that's what we're doing, is adding this folder path to say, hey, come in and search for git. To do this, come over to your search bar and then type env. To the find environment variables, the simplest way is to come over to your search bar and search for env, edit system environment variables. Click that. You will get a folder pop up over here, taking you to system properties in the advanced tab. Main one here is environment variables. Click that. So this is the main one. It is path here. So you can go and edit this. So this is a list of file paths that your machine will look into to find these different applications to go and run. So in this case, I can see that my file path for Git isn't here, although it's probably been used by another application here. I suspect this one. But what I'm going to do is just add this file path so I can go and still call Git if you were having this issue. So if you go new, what you can do is go and take this file path, program files /git. So I'm going to go hit new, I'm going to go paste that in there, then I'm going to click OK. And then OK again. And click out of that. And just verify that that will work. So if you're able to do version, you should see a version of Git come up, which is great. If it's a previous version, it's not the version you expected, I would go back and check those paths in the environment variables and see what other applications are bringing Git in. It may be that you can just go and install an upgrade for those other programs to go and get the new version of Git. Equally, if you find there's a folder path that you're not using that's calling an old version of Git, you can always go and remove it, and so you can access this newer version. So if you're installing Git, you haven't used Git much before, I would recommend doing is installing GitHub Desktop. This is a application where you can go and actually manage different repositories of code, and this will help with the what's changed, what are you going to send to the actual repository online as well. This is a very helpful application for actually starting projects too as well, because you can go and just start a new repository as well. While you're installing GitHub Desktop and Git, I'd also recommend getting a GitHub account if you don't have one already. These are very helpful for actually displaying some of your portfolio. You can see this is my profile page here where I've created a README for different types of visualizations I've done, but it also has all of the repositories I've worked on in the past. And this provides a very helpful interface for accessing code on GitHub, sending code to GitHub, committing to projects, collaborating with different people. If you go and Google for install Python, you will come to this page here. And straight away, I'm getting a big banner telling me to install Python 3.13. Now, if you remember earlier on the DBT docs, we saw that actually our highest version here for DBT is 3.12. We haven't got the confirmation that 3.13 works. So what I would recommend is installing 3.12 if you know you're going to be working on the latest version of DBT, or a previous version if you've got back compatibility in mind. So 3.10 should be good. Equally 3.8 if you've got it installed should be sufficient. Okay, so now installing Python. So you're looking to download Python. There are some versions down here, although I prefer using the direct installer. So you can go click for Windows here. That will take you to this page here where you can go and download specific versions of Python. Find your specific Python version, but have a specific installer. This just makes the installation process that much easier because it specifies what folder it's going to be installed into. So I'm going to go and download this 3.12.7. This seems to be quite a recent version, so I'm happy with that. I then go back to my downloads folder and double click. Okay, two things here that are super important to mention. Keep a note of this folder path. This is where it will go and install Python for you. So when it comes to setting environment variables, this is going to be a highly important folder to know. Trying to track these down by yourself using the machine and say the search function takes a very long time. So you can actually save yourself some time. If you can't find it, uninstall it, reinstall it again to find this folder path. Honestly, it is quicker. And the other important thing is to add Python the executable to path. So that will then go and mean when you type Python -- version, it will be on the path for you already. You don't need to do the environment variable stuff. Okay, so that's worked. That's been installed. Let's go and close that. Okay, so first thing to do is to go back to that terminal and see if Python has actually been installed to your path. Okay, so there we go. I can run that command. I can see Python's installed. You can also go and check that folder. So the folder that was mentioned to you at the start. So for me, it's my username, app data, local programs, Python 3.12. This will come up. And you can see here, there's my Python executable. And as we did with Git, I can actually go and put in the full file path to get to this folder and also that executable file there to get my version of Python. So I can see that works and that runs. Now, if you're having trouble at this stage or you're having a different number of Python coming up when you hit Python -- version than you previously installed or thought, I would come to here, come to your environment variables and check under path. So if you search for env, you'll be come to edit system environment variables, click that, and you'll be entered into system properties and then environment variables. Click that. So you then have this path and you go and hit edit. Now you've got all these different folder paths that your machine will go and look to find things like your Python executable. So here you can see I've added a file path for 3.12. That is there. I've also added one for the scripts here too. So under scripts, you have a few more. So you have pip, which is your package installer. That is very helpful. So you can see here we've got the executable, but we've also got the ones with the specific version number attached. So if you're unsure where Python is coming from, there's a command where Python. That doesn't work for my machine. I don't really know why. But what I can do is I can type Python where. And that will say, actually, we can't find this file. But you can see here, it's given me the file path for which version of Python is being used. So it's being used by Anaconda, which is a sort of another version of Python packager available, and it's using that version. So in this case, I could go and I could remove the folders for Anaconda, but that's also linked to like a number of other projects. What I can do here is I can actually upgrade my version of Anaconda Python to a later version. And that can be like an easier way than trying to find and uninstall everything, is find out what version of Python your machine is actually calling upon and then maybe upgrade or improve that version. So this was me logging onto Anaconda and upgrading Python via the command line there. Okay, so we got a version of Python installed. If we come back to our docs, we got our compatibility matrix. It then starts talking about creating virtual environments. So this is a way that you can contain all your packages for the Python project you're working on in one folder. What can happen is if you have several different versions of Python, several different package versions, what they can do is they can start conflicting with one another, or you might be calling a different version of a package that's not compatible with DBT and this stuff. It can become a real headache. So this is having a very contained, like these are my packages that work on my machine, and that makes your code that much more portable for anyone else who wants to use it. So if you're working with a team, it's not that the code works on my machine and no one else's, it's that it can work on everyone's machine. So we will go through this, we will set up a virtual environment, that will be okay. But installing DBT, here is where we'll do it. So pip install DBT. So dbt-core will be the core package, but then is understanding what type of database connection you're going to use for DBT. So the idea is that dbt will then go and connect to, say, Postgres database, Microsoft SQL database, MySQL database, all types of different adapters dbt has to connect to those. So here, the example is it's going to connect to a Postgres database. So dbt-core, dbt Postgres. Okay, so before we get started creating an environment and installing dbt, we're going to need a project folder to work in. I'm going to create this as a GitHub repository so I can go and track the changes, send it to GitHub, show off my work as part of my portfolio. To do that, I'm going to open up GitHub Desktop. I'm going to go File, New Repository. That will then just create a normal like Windows folder in this file path. So I've got a folder for GitHub that will be in there. But importantly, it will be tracked for any changes and the contents of that folder will be sent to github.com. Okay, so I'm going to give it a name, initialize it with a README. That means that I'm going to add a place for documentation with the code. That's super important, especially if you're doing this for a portfolio. So your license, this just is an established sort of set of guidelines for anyone accessing your code. This helps ensure that they get what they expect and you are protected as part of this. If you are typically unsure, MIT license is what you'll need majority of the time. However, there may be specific situations where you want additional protection. So here's a website, choosealicense.com. It helps explain open source licenses if you're unsure. So typically, as I mentioned, MIT license, that people are free to do whatever they want with the code, but I'm not liable if anything goes wrong. But there may be other restrictions or guidance that you want to include here with how your code is being used. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to go hit create repository. Okay, so that has gone to added this here. So it's going to set up a repository. We've got an initial commit, which means created this folder. We're on the main branch, which is how we're going to track changes via branches. So we can go and publish this to GitHub if we want, but we won't do it at the moment. So I can see here under Documents GitHub, new dbt project has been created. This is what I get. I get a few files, so I get my license, I get my README that I specified, and I get some Git attributes, which is just for the tracking of the changes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this folder in VS Code. So I've opened up VS Code and it's very blank at the moment. I can click any of these files and those will appear there along the tabs along the top. That's all good, but what I need to do is start installing things. And to do that, I'll need to go here and go to Terminal, New Terminal. So what this does is very similar to this terminal application. It will run terminal here in VS Code for you. So you can go and run code, install packages right here in VS Code where you're going to write your different dbt code. Okay, so the first line here is to create a new virtual environment. So Python venv. Okay, so I've got my terminal, I've got my folder ready. So this is giving me that file path that I'll be working in for my root. So I'm just going to go and start pasting in those commands from the docs. So I go and paste that there. What this is going to do is going to create an environment for me. dbt-env here. So this specifies virtual environment, then this gives a name to that folder, which is here. So you can actually change this last section to whatever you want. And that will just become that folder name. Okay, so this is done. I can go and have a look at what's happened here. So in here, it is going to installed basically a system to run Python and how it's going to work. So under scripts, you will see Python, you will see pip. You'll also see this activate or several versions of activate. This is how you initialize the virtual environment. So we're not running on the code on my machine anymore, but we're running from this little environment place here. So I go back to the dbt docs, I can see what the code is to activate my environment. Okay, so there's two options here depending on your operating system. So first line is for Mac or Linux. For me, I'm going to just need to go and use this one. This bottom one here for Windows, so dbt. So the folder path that I created into scripts and then that file that says activate on it. Okay, so if I run that, hit enter. So you can see here now that dbt-env is now there. Okay, so now I've got in my environment set up, I'm going to install dbt and an adapter that I'm going to use to connect to a database. Okay, so on adapters, there are lists of what adapters are available. So you can click this link for which adapters. So two types, trusted or community adapters. And under here, you'll find different applications that you can install with dbt-core. For me, I'm actually going to be on this one, so I'm going to be using DuckDB. This is a file-based database. It's kind of cool. So I'm going to be using DuckDB, which will come up in the Spill the DBT challenges. So this is how you install DuckDB. So you get this sort of script here. So I'm going to go and take this, but your script will be very similar. It just depends on what adapter you're using, which will go here at the end. So dbt Postgres, dbt Redshift. Right, back to VS Code. I'm going to go run this. Okay, so that's finished. You can actually see here, while I've had that environment folder open, it's actually added a lot more different options here, or executables for me to use. So a lot of these weren't here before. That's been installed as part of this. This is kind of why you do this in a environment like this. You can also see with the green dots that actually some site packages have been installed here as well. So this is where these packages have gone and been placed in here. So you can see actually we've got DBT and the adapters down here as well. Okay, so if you go back to the docs, that's basically it. We've got DBT installed, so how can we use it? Okay, so I've done pip install DBT. How does it work? So you would do dbt init. So this will initialize a DBT project, and then next you will give it the name. So I will call this test DBT. So what this will do is we'll initialize a DBT project called test DBT project. Very inventive name. And you can see it here. So when I've gone initialized, it will say, oh, what profile would you like to use? So we can see that I've got the adapter for DuckDB here. So it gives me the option, which one do you want to be connecting to? So I'm going to go for one, just DuckDB. So you'll see a new folder has been set up called test DBT project. So under here is that DBT project folder. So it's got its own README, it's got its project YAML files, it's got all the folders that you will need for testing and running your DBT models and projects. Okay, and also as standard, you will get the example DBT project. These two scripts here that will go and materialize a table with some example values. Okay, so when I was picking that database adapter where I was entering the number 1, it mentioned about a profile, a DBT profile. This is a super important doc that maintains all your DBT connections to databases. It contains usually some quite sensitive information like passwords, so it is not contained anywhere in this project. Okay, it's not here anywhere. But where it is in a .dbt folder. So if I go to my C drive, go to users and go to my name, I will find in here a lot of dot objects. So I've got .dbt here, and here it's got my user profile as well as the profiles. I was to click under profiles. So for me, profiles here contains a list of file paths to go and find databases that are DuckDB databases. So these file-based databases. For other applications like Postgres, Redshift, Snowflake, these are much more likely to be username, passwords, host locations, or where the database is on the cloud. Now, in these cases, this is quite sensitive information, so this is why this file is obscured to your user profile and shouldn't be shared with anyone. So again, you definitely don't put this stuff on GitHub, and yeah, that is where that file is kept. And it's a good one to keep in mind because often you'll have errors where you can't actually go and connect to your database. Okay, so the first protocol is to go and set up the profiles file so you can go and read from a database, and then you can start running DBT projects from here. You'll just need to go and move into the folder. So if I cd or change directory into dbt test dbt project, I'm now in that file, and now I can start running different dbt commands or dbt run to run this model. Okay, so you've got your dbt project, and in fact this project itself can just be your repository as it is. You can actually have this uploaded instead. But I've got this environment. I don't want to be really sharing all the different scripts and all the things here associated with this environment. So what I can do here is use gitignore to actually ignore this environment folder. And you can even look here into terms of the gitignore for the dbt project. So you can see here there'll be folders created when you start running dbt commands for target and logs and packages, so those don't get updated. I mean, definitely don't want to be sending logs. Target will be all the SQL code that is rendered, so that won't get shared as well, and any packages you install. So let's do the same. I'm going to go copy one of these, so gitignore, and I'm just going to go. So if I hit save on that, you can see now that that folder has been grayed out. It was green before as new, but now it's been grayed out. If I go back to my GitHub desktop application, I can actually see what's happening here. So I can see I can see everything being added under the test dbt project, and also that gitignore file being added. If I was to say get rid of this, so if I remove the option my gitignore file, you can see actually we get a lot of other changes coming through. In fact, 7,000 odd changes. You don't want that. Okay, so we've got git installed, we've got Python, we've got dbt. The last thing you might need is a SQL client to go and read your database. If you're using things like Postgres, these kind of have these built in for you, so you might not need this at all. But with DuckDB, it's just a file, and I can communicate it to it with like the command line, but it's not quite the same as if I actually connect and have an application that I can go and run SQL code against. The SQL code part is very important because then you can check your errors, so you can see whether this is a DBT specific error or actually something going on with the SQL code that you can go and fix in the SQL client. So I've used DBeaver a few times in the past. This has a very good functionality, especially on the community version. I find is excellent. So I'd recommend installing that, getting that set up. Once you do, you can then set up a connector for your specific database. So in my case, there is an option to have DuckDB connection there as well. Okay, so if you made it to this stage, excellent. You've got dbt installed, you're ready to go. And I have a range of challenges that you might want to try. Yeah, so this is Spill the DBT. It's a set of DBT based challenges to help go and elevate those skills, build on the learning that you've got, and get you ready for that certification work and beyond. How these tasks work is I give you a set of requirements. This will be things like databases. This will be things like SQL scripts or Python scripts to go and run in DBT. You also get a set of tasks to do. So what these tasks are, if you go and look under here, so this is step-by-step instructions on getting this project running in DBT. And how you get started is super simple. All you need to do is come over to my GitHub repository for Spill the DBT and go over and hit fork. So you'll be able to then have your own version of this repository that you can then work on. And that's everything for this video. I will see you in the next one. Bye.